avoid sin reigning in your mortal body? Well, it's through obeying the law. It's through obeying the 10 Commandments. How can you avoid the dominion of sin? How can you avoid slavery to sin? It's by obeying the law. This is really the same sort of idea that you see in the prologue to the 10 Commandments, isn't it? This is the same sort of idea that you see way back there in Exodus. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You have been set free from slavery to sin. So why on earth would you ever want to submit to it any longer? You are free from sin, so don't sin. And here's 10 rules for you to follow. So, whatever this means, whatever it means when Paul is saying you're not under the law but under grace, it can't mean that you're free completely from the 10 Commandments. So what does it mean to be under grace but not under the law? And it means simply this. When you're talking about when Paul is talking about under the law in this verse, what he is talking about is to be under the dominion, condemnation, and slavery of sin. One thing that the law cannot do is save you. The law, when you read it, the only thing that it has the power to do is to bring condemnation upon you. When you try to live through the 10 Commandments and do them perfectly, and then you go back and study the law, the one thing that you should be learning is that you're not able to do it. We are not able to keep the 10 Commandments perfectly all the time. And so if you try to be under the law by being good enough, then you're going to be constantly frustrated because you're never really going to be good enough. You're always going to have this nagging conscience. You're always going to be wondering whether or not God really likes you. You're always going to be wondering if you've done enough stuff, if you've prayed enough, if you've been devoted to God enough. And you're never going to have real peace inside your heart. But when you realize the wonderful truth that Jesus Christ has been good enough for you, when you realize that Jesus has paid for your sins, and you believe in that, then you have real freedom. Then you realize that you have freedom from trying to please God by your works, from trying to win God's favor by striving to do every single commandment all the time. Freedom from seeking peace, from doing what you are morally unable to do. That's what Paul is talking about. When he's talking about freedom from being under the law, he's talking about freedom from being under the condemnation of the law. You have that kind of freedom. So that is what Romans 6:14 is talking about. And when you think about this, that is something that should be absolute good news to you. That is something that you should cling to. That's something you should cling to as a Christian. You should realize that you've been set free from the condemnation of the law. Now let's look at Ephesians chapter 2. Ephesians chapter 2, verses 14 and 15. This is another verse that people use to say you don't have to obey the 10 Commandments. Jesus has broken down in his flesh the dividing wall of hostility by abolishing the law of commandments. Jesus has broken down in his flesh the dividing wall of hostility by abolishing the law and his commandments. So once again, this is not something that should be understood to be a contradiction to what Jesus has said. We shouldn't jump to that conclusion. We shouldn't say that the Bible is both black and red. We can't say that Jesus both abolished the law and did not abolish the law. But let's think about what is going on in context. If you go in and you look closely at Ephesians chapter 2, you'll see that a lot of what Paul is talking about has to do with the Gentiles being included in the people of God. And so when Paul is talking about this dividing wall of hostility, he is talking about a separation that used to exist between Jews and Gentiles. Previous to Jesus Christ coming to be with us on this earth, God was working mostly among one particular nation. That is very different than the way in which He is working today. We have believers here from the Solomon Islands. We have believers here from all different parts of Africa, from America, from Okinawa, from the Philippines. God is working among all the nations today. The dividing wall of hostility has been broken down. God is not working among one nation only, but He is working among us all. You don't have to be Jewish in order to be a part of God's family. Amen. And so when this law was broken down, that meant that Christians no longer had to keep the Old Testament ceremonial laws that were given to Israel as a nation. When the dividing wall of hostility was broken down, it meant that Christians no longer had to keep the ceremonial law of the Old Testament, the things that defined Israel as a nation. Here's what I mean. We no longer have to do sacrifices today. It was commanded that the people of Israel in the Old Testament do sacrifices because that was pointing towards Jesus Christ. Now, there is nothing that would bar us from doing sacrifices today. There is no reason, we could do it if we wanted to. We could be sacrificing a cow right there if we wanted to. I'm not exactly sure, I don't think we can get it to the elevator. Maybe we can run the thing up the stairs, but there is nothing that is going to prevent us from sacrificing a cow right there, today. We could pull it off if we wanted to. So why are we not doing that? Why are we not sacrificing a cow today? The normal thing that was expected in Old Testament worship was because the perfect sacrifice has already been made. And there's no reason for any other sacrifices. When they sacrificed a lamb or a goat or a cow or whatever in the Old Testament, that had a purpose. It was to picture something. It was to help them to understand that one day a perfect sacrifice would come that would genuinely take away sin. And now that that perfect sacrifice has come, there's no reason for us to do this ceremony anymore. And so the Gentiles are free not to sacrifice bulls. They are free not to do the ceremonial laws of the Old Testament. And that's really good for us. We're not required to be normal Jewish Old Testament people in order to be Christians. We don't have to leave our cultures behind. We don't have to cease being Okinawan or American or Solomon Islander in order to be Christians. But we can continue to be genuinely a part of our own people, and yet we can all have unity in Jesus Christ. So, you are free from the ceremonial law. You are free from using the law as a pathway to salvation. Yet, this freedom is not freedom to sin. When you really understand what is going on in the gospel, when you understand that your sin brought condemnation not on yourself but on Jesus Christ, when you understand that your sin brings punishment not on yourself but on Jesus Christ, it should make you desire with your entire heart to be obedient to Him. And that is news that can be absolutely life-changing to someone who is a Christian. You can have a new appreciation for what Jesus has done. You can have a new comfort by being accepted by Him. At a church that I worked at in the past, there was this lady who I was talking to, and she came up to me and was saying that she had this one prayer that she really needed to have answered. So she was trying to be extra good that week so that God would hear her prayers. What do you think about that? This lady was saying that she needed to be extra good so that God would hear her prayers. There's people shaking their heads. I think I heard somebody actually say no. Yeah. It is not true. It's not how it works. Let's think for a moment about a verse in the book of James. James chapter 5, verse 16 to 18. The prayer of a righteous person has great power as it is working. Amen. And so when this lady heard that, she said, I've got to be a really, 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 really good person in order for God to like me. I've got to be good enough that God is going to hear my prayers. I've got to be extra